Hello and welcome guys to another video, and today we have another hot lap and track guide. This is for the Mazda MX-5 Rookie Series, so it is a fixed setup. So we're going to watch the hot lap first and then we'll have a look at the track guide. So coming into the first sequence of corners, there's 3 left-handers here, and you want to take it as one continuous corner. So this can be a bit tricky to get your line right, especially with cold tires. This track can be a bit of a nightmare, so you want to be careful on the opening laps of any races you do here. But once your tires are warmed up, our turn-in for the first left-hander is going to be the end of this wall on the right. And a lot of the track limits here, when it's a white line, is that you can put 2 wheels over the white line as long as you keep 2 wheels on the tarmac. So for a lot of corners like this where you see the track limits here, I'm driving about the middle of the car over that white line. So coming into the first corner here, we want to begin our turn-in at the end of that wall there. We don't need to hug this apex, we can just miss it depending on how hot your tires are. So as you see, I just missed that apex, and you see I'm lifting off the throttle. Now because you're braking and turning, you want to be very careful not to spin the rear of the car and try and keep it as stable as possible. You can drop all the way down into first gear, but I try and keep it in second just for that added stability. So as you see, I'm going to brake to about 60% brake pressure. Sorry, more like 50% brake pressure. Then come off the brakes, and then I'll get back on the brakes and trying to get onto this inside curb here. As you see, kind of a 4-wheel drift. Get onto this curb, and as soon as I get onto this curb, I'm getting back on the power. And then lifting off the power to try and keep the car stable, and then just before I get to this curb, I'm braking to then turn it back in for this final part of the corner. As you see, the back does step out a bit, so you may have to correct it. As soon as I correct it, immediately getting back over to the left, and then you can start using the throttle to turn the car. And as soon as the rear grips, you can use a lot of this curbing here. The track limits is the edge of this red and white curbing, so you can cut this a lot. As soon as I know the car is rotated enough, I go full throttle. You may have to lift a little bit if you feel the rear stepping out there. I lifted to like 80% there. And then here again, you can cut this. It's the red and white curbing. So you can cut quite a bit of this, let it drift out wide. Now here there isn't a braking marker that's particularly good. So what I do is, see the end of this grass, just before there I'm braking, and because we're going downhill I brake up to about 90%, and then start to trail the brakes off as I come into the corner. As you see, I'm getting off the brakes very early and already on the power just before I hit the curb, and we want as late an apex as possible on this corner. And then again, the red and white curbing is what I find track limits. I have seen some hot laps where there's a few corners like this where the track limit is the grass, this corner and another corner, but I tried it and I kept getting off track even when I didn't touch the grass, so I can only assume that that's been updated slightly, but I could be wrong there. Feel free to test it, but I just use the red and white curbing. Now this corner, this I struggle with the most because there, as you can see, there's no braking marker on either side of the track. So this is where I start the braking, and it's quite a high pressure. So as you see, the tire wall just disappears off our center monitor when we brake, but depending on your field of view, that's going to be quite different. So you just have to get a feel for the braking point of this corner. But what you can do is play with your brake pressure. So if you notice you braked slightly too late, you can just brake harder and in a straight line and turn in later. And if you brake early, then you can just brake a little bit less pressure, because as soon as you hit the brakes, you pretty much know if you brake too early or not. It's coming into this corner, you can cut a lot here. So as you see, I'm getting off the brakes really early, allowing the car to rotate, and the red and white curbing is the track limit here. So I'm cutting as much of this as possible. Very easy to spin, as you can see my tire marks from previous hot laps. So as soon as I feel the rear is gripped, then I'm getting on the power again. And here it's the red and white curbing for track limits, but be very careful because it's very easy for the back to step out. Now coming into this left-hander, you can take all of this red and white curbing here. Again, the track limits is the edge of that red and white curbing. So take as much as possible. You want to be as far to the left of the track as possible, remembering track limits is this line, so get 2 wheels over that track limit. At the start of this gravel, I'm going to lift and turn in, and then get on the power just before I hit this red and white curbing. As you see, completely lift, and then just before I hit this red and white curbing, I'm getting back on the power. And as soon as I know that the car is rotated enough to not go wide here, I'm going full power. And now again, the track limits is the edge of that red and white curbing, so you can get quite high on the exit here, but it is a bit of a risk for track limits, and you can unstabilize the car sometimes, so I try not to go too high up here. But the braking marker is that second drain pipe from the end, so that's the last one, and this is the one we use as our braking marker. As you see, I'm braking really high pressure there, about 90%, trailing off the brakes nice and early, and because this is uphill, I'm getting on the power before we hit the apex and trying to hit as late an apex as possible, and avoiding hitting that curb because I don't want to unsettle the car as we go up the hill. Now here, this is the corner where I've seen a lot of hot laps where they use all this road here, as long as you don't touch the gravel and grass, but when I tried it I got a track limit, so I'm not sure if that's been updated or not, or if I was just doing it wrong, so feel free to experiment with that, but I just don't go further than that red and white curbing. Now, this is one of the hardest corners, apart from the one without a braking marker, because it's completely blind, but once you get the muscle memory, it's quite easy. What I do, personally, is see there's two, I don't know what these are, if they're light towers or something like that, or speaker towers. I think they're some form of lights, like this one. When you see the second one is when I start looking for my apex, because the apex is about here for the left-hander, and it's usually full throttle unless you're on cold tires or you're struggling with the rear getting unstable, then you can lift a little bit. But I'm looking for this, and then as you see, as soon as you see the full tower, you can see the start of the curb. So my eyesight is focusing on this tower, and then as soon as I can see the full tower, I can see the apex of the corner. So I'm turning to the left as soon as I see this, and then committing as soon as I see the start of that apex curb. And as you see, that lines us up pretty well. Track limits, edge of the red and white curbing. I'm going full throttle here, and the rear was okay, but if it gets too unstable, like I say, you can just lift a little bit on that corner to keep it stable. This hairpin you want as late in apex as possible, so I try and trail the brakes as late into the corner as possible, and then just shift down the gears nice and slow. So as you see, shifting down into first gear and a little tap of the brakes for that extra rotation and bring it nice and tight and that late apex. Then getting on the power, and again we want to cut this corner as much as possible. Track limits is the red and white curbing, so cutting that corner. Then coming down the hill, this is very difficult with the load transfer. So what you want to do is this right hander here, the track limit is that red and white curbing there. But because of the uphill and tight left here, it's very easy to spin here. So what I try and do is get as far onto the right part of the track as possible, and then get on the power just before I hit the apex of this left-hander. So let's have a look at this. So I'm braking just before we get to the start of this red and white curbing, and since we're going downhill and it's compressing the suspension, I'm braking at almost 100% brake force. Trying to keep my steering wheel as straight as possible since we're braking with such high pressure. And again, because the track limits are so far over to the right, you can cut a lot of this, but be careful, because if you cut too much, it's usually an instant 1 second slowdown, and on the start of that big straight, you do not want that in the race. So it's a bit of a high risk if you try and take any more curb than what I'm taking here. So as you see here, trying to get that turn in. The turn in point for this left-hander is just after the end of this green curbing here. You want to turn in for the left-hander. As you see, I'm coming completely off the brakes just before the start of this curb and getting on the throttle. Try and play around with this, because different grip conditions, it will change a bit how early you can get on the power. And you don't want to take too much of this curb because it will unsettle the car. And then I'm trying to open up the steering wheel as quick as possible, and this red and white curbing is the track limit. Then getting a nice drive up the hill, and as you see, since we're going up the hill and then on to the start of the next lap, the exit of this final corner here is super important. So you sometimes want to sacrifice a little bit of entry speed here just to allow yourself to get on the power earlier for this left-hander. But that is it for the track guide, guys. The potential lap we had there was a 33.0, so there is a bit more time in the lap, definitely. It's very difficult to get consistent times here with some of the corners not having reference points, so you really have to put a lot of practice into this track, but hopefully this track guide helps you guys out. And as always, thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed, and see you again next time.